Hopefully we held on to everyone. Yeah, thanks so much for sticking with us here. I think we're all back, Tom. Is that true?
We should all be back.
Okay, so welcome back. We still have our presenters here, and does anyone have a question for Carrie, Charles, or Kira? You can raise your hand using the the reactions tab in Zoom. If you put your hand up, I can more easily see it. Basically, go to the top of the list. Wow, those breakout groups must have been really wonderful.
We had a lovely visit in downtown too.
All right, well, let's talk about it. Charles, what was happening in your group?
Breakouts.
Well, we had a really lovely conversation about a range of topics. There was consensus, astonishingly, around the notion that the four municipalities were often under-resourced with not only kind of dollars, but also human capital in certain areas, particularly around fiscal planning. There was a general conversation about the desirability of having venues. I think Town Green's credit, that they've begun this process. Like, where are the venues for regional conversation or cooperation, if not consensus? We also talked about studies in other parts of the country. We talked about South Florida. We talked about the Gulf Coast post Katrina. We talked about other parts of New England in which various organizations, various entities are trying different approaches. And at the same moment, there was a general sense that I think most of our downtowners felt relatively securely insulated, at least for now. We got in the habit of introducing ourselves based on our base elevation. Where's your kitchen floor, which is an interesting metric to have these days. And also we talked about the kind of concerns or anxieties around our children, our grandchildren, will they be able to stay in Rockport? Not only from the point of view of meaning and kind of conveyance of family history, but also from the point of view of intergenerational wealth, given that people's houses are one of the primary mechanisms of wealth production and capacity. We can talk about migration, but if it's absent human meaning, or if it erases the character of Rockport, then what's been lost?
Maureen, you're muted.
So sorry, Sam, you have a question.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Maureen. Yes, I just had a question. Really good options in terms of adaptation. I'm particularly interested in whether or not the adaptations have been prioritized along these we need to do immediately, exact locations. And I saw that you had some estimated costs, sort of breaking these into short, medium, and long range pieces. Just wondering what kind of thinking had gone into that.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, what I would say is, and we'll post again in the chat the link to the web-based platform. That's an internal facing web platform for now, but we want you to have access to it. And please take a look at it, when you have a moment, and send us your thoughts. I'll put my email in the chat as well. The first thing that we said was, we are enjoying the collaboration with Town Green in part because of the mandate to look at precedents and literature broadly. And right now, what we've been thinking about is, well, which precedents are most relevant? And we don't feel like it's our job to prioritize those responses, but rather to organize them into a kind of menu or matrix. We're convinced that the decisions about the future of Cape Ann will be taken by Cape Anners, yourselves included. We can say pretty confidently, as Kira laid out, that in a place with a highly crenellated coastline like Cape Ann, one of the desirable draws of living in this place has to do with the extensivity of that coastline and its relationship to the natural environment, the ocean in particular. Given that extremity, and given the hundreds and hundreds or more houses that are already in the floodplain across Cape Ann, there's some pretty clear things that we can suggest we should stop doing. We should stop putting houses in the floodplain. We should stop building more impervious surfaces. We should try to remove buildings that are in wetlands and marshes, etc. But having said that, the idea of prioritizing tends to presume a sort of political economy that we're not really in place to be able to make judgments about. We can give you trade-offs from a point of view. We can also say anecdotally that the history of Cape Ann has tended, when there have been major investments, they have tended to come from the state and the federal government, and they have tended to prioritize Gloucester's inner harbor. That's not a value judgment, that's just an observation. And if we could imagine, both green and gray, hard and soft systems insulating all of Cape Anners equally or equitably, that doesn't look like Gloucester Inner Harbor. That looks like a very different thing, but it's also at a scale and at a cost. It's hard to imagine when you think about it in state and federal terms. Kira, what else would you add to that?
I would say there are also, just thinking about Carrie, the way that you broke it down into stakeholders, I think is great. In terms of an individual level, one of the best things that you can do is to stop using pesticides and fertilizers on your lawn, no matter where you live, whether it's next to the ocean or in uplands, just because any fertilizer, any pesticide that you put on to your personal landscape is flowing downstream, and the water is carrying it through marshes and into the ocean. And so that's kind of a low-hanging fruit, just thinking about shifting to organic lawn management and planting more native trees and shrubs. And I would say we do have a series of recommendations that start to break things down into different time periods and scales. But again, those are decisions to make. And I think just something that we talked about in our Long Beach conversation was also just bringing stakeholders to the table and making sure that town administrators and selectmen are able to start applying for grants and thinking about things like that, and just encouraging those elected officials to be in dialogue and in conversation within the community.
Good point, Kira. In addition to finding, relative costs to the extent they're available, we've also identified and targeted areas of funding to the extent they're available as well.
I would only add that in this area, there is a group of communities around Casco Bay and Southern Maine Regional Planning Commission that has been doing this for a number of years, and they'd be a good model because they also operate on the one town, one government model that we use here in Eastern Mass. So they're worth looking into. They have a continuing dialogue, or at least they did. And God knows we'll never get all the towns to agree, but there may be things that they wish to pursue together, a project, or prioritize together, or to abandon. So the conversation is all, for sure, in my opinion.
We'll take a look at Casco for sure.
Yeah,
Great,
I will.
thank you.
I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Carrie, would you like to say something about your group?
About my group?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I respond to Sam real quick also? Just add
absolutely. Sure.
Great. Sam, and this actually, right as our group was ending, Carol, I think it was Carol in our group, was asking also, what is the process that you go through to put together a group that could debate the options, which is related to what Sam just asked. I'm just going to very quickly say like the main steps that usually we would go through. So the first step would be to try to put together the representative, like a representative group where you have a person who is representative of a body of different kind of interests in the community. And that person is understood to be the people that people contact if they're the ones that are representing them. So we would have, a small-ish group, and then we would have separate kinds of engagements for the entire community. And someone in our group said, what we really need in Rockport is just a neutral debate space. So we need a space where the ideas can be put forward and we can discuss them, and we can talk about the pros and cons, and we can say, what are the repercussions of this? What would be the trade-offs of choosing this versus that? And so that space to create for conversation, that no one is making decisions yet, right? No one is committing to anything yet. We are putting the options out, we're debating the merits, we're discussing yay or nay and what would happen, and then ultimately putting together some proposed packages of ideas that then get reviewed by the public at large, right? And then reviewed by some of the elected officials. And along that way, you put costs to each of those things. And not just costs in terms of money, but costs in terms of community sacrifice that has to be made. And I'll just say one more thing, Sam, and this relates to your question around how you prioritize. Well, you prioritize things based on your values. So one of the things we do early in these processes is name that there's a package of options that would meet the values of environmental protection. There's a package of things that would meet the value of historic preservation. There's a package of things that would meet the value of saving money, right? So one of the first things you have to do as a community is say, which are the values that we are going to elevate, because that affects our prioritization. Because one town will do one kinds of things because they're trying to meet a certain set of values, and another town would do other things. And neither is right or wrong. It's just what is right for that community and that community's values. So one of the first things we do is try to establish what are the values that you most care about. So when push comes to shove, you're going to do the thing that is more in favor of your value to preserve the legacy, for example, of the historic district than to preserve the economic value of the historic district. Those are examples, right? Anyway, so our group, I'll just quickly say our group came up with a few really interesting ideas. We had a long discussion about this need for debate, right? For just like a neutral, non-decision-making learning space for debate. We had a long conversation about that. And there's concern about Long Beach falling or moving into private ownership versus public ownership. And there was a desire to coordinate with Gloucester, so to have that regional perspective that Kara and Charles both talked about. And so the three ideas that came out, the three main ideas were, one was to have this town-sponsored neutral debate space. Two was to see the options that Kara presented, but with some figures attached to them, so people have a different way of like evaluating them. And then third was to get some real like official legitimate coordination with Gloucester to recognize that this is a regional question and not just a town question. Anyone from my group, please jump in if you feel like I've missed something, but those were kind of the main takeaways that I captured.
I do want to jump in and just highlight, I dropped it into the chat. The Long Beach Options Committee created this really incredible comprehensive report with 9 scenarios that are very detailed. Some of them do have cost estimates. And those are everything from selling the cottages or selling the land to private landowners to managed retreat situations. So I'd encourage everyone to look through that.
Thanks, Kira. The group that I was facilitating, we talked about the benefits of having a rocky coast, a granite below us, and it's very unlike, you know, what Cape Cod is dealing with because it's mostly sand, and also the Carolinas and those issues there. So there is a benefit to that, and also the grounding that rock can provide, especially if you're talking about elevating structures, but also like what would that do to the economic engine of Rockport, the business district, as you were mentioning, Carrie, you know, it's the historic, it is not a designated historic area. I learned from Eric Hutchins at our wonderful field trip, but it is nonetheless a historic district. And we also talked about, you know, how we can have a conversation and keep these conversations rolling, especially with town government and different stakeholders, bringing together important voices. So again, anybody from my group who wants to chime in, please do so. We had a great conversation. Any last questions for folks or thoughts? I know we said we're going to 8:30, but maybe we can close at 8. Valerie, you have a question or a comment?
Oh, yeah, just basically how really interesting and complex the suggestions were. But my only comment is that I think the larger challenge for all of us is how few people actually trouble themselves to get involved in these discussions. And I think what you find in other places, if you don't have pretty broad and deep engagement across the community, you're probably not going to be able to make costly decisions going forward. So that's the only thing I would add. And I think in Gloucester, we have the same issue in Rockport. There are some constituencies that don't show up as much as others, but if it's something that they end up perceiving as a threat to their community, you know, they can stop a lot of things in the end. So community outreach, engagement. I think that's a larger backdrop to all of this.
Yeah, and certainly, thanks so much, Valerie, for that comment. Town Green. Sorry for feedback there. Town Green is certainly interested in having more of these conversations. This is why we're pulling people together, because they're discussions that we need to have. Eric, you have your hand up for a comment.
Yeah, I just figured I'd bring this up. I assume probably at least half the people in this call know this, but maybe not everyone does. The state of Massachusetts has an extensive grant program called the MVP program, Municipal Vulnerability Program, that opened last week for grants to towns throughout the Commonwealth. And there's a lot of federal grants available right now too. But the state grant program opened last week. Applications are due in about 5 weeks. Almost everything I heard on this evening's presentation and comments from everybody in the public, all of them would be viably incorporated into such a grant to support municipal vulnerability planning due to climate change here in Rockport. All of it. Even the fact that this meeting took place should be in an application. That their public are listening and are making comments.
Thanks, Eric. Jerry, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so in response to Eric's
Jerry, we lost you there.
can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah, in response to Eric's comment, how does that happen, Eric? Who makes that happen in our community?
I know a lot about this. Do you want me to say, Eric, or do you?
You can take a crack at it. Go ahead.
Okay. So the program, you have to be a municipality to apply. So someone from the town has to be willing to put the proposal together, or you can hire someone to put the proposal together. Consultants will put these proposals together all the time for towns, and they'll pay a little bit to get the proposal put together. But they're scored in a very systematic way. And you basically just have to meet the requirements of the scoring guides. And everything, like Eric said, everything that is being discussed here fits very, very neatly into their scoring. The one thing that I don't know enough about Rockport to say, but someone else might, is that they do have, they're very interested in making sure that the work that they're doing is equitable across the state. And so they are very interested in serving environmental justice communities. And my sense, though I'm not sure, is that Rockport would score very low on the environmental justice pieces of the application. But the risk level and the sort of approach and the ingenuity and the need is very high. So anyway, I don't know who in Rockport would be putting together the proposal and what specifically they would be asking for, but you could submit multiple proposals. So one for a community engagement piece, one for building out on what the Long Beach Commission already did in terms of options that were proposed, sort of going the next step in building out those options. There are a variety of things that could be done.
Maureen?
Yes.
If I may, I have a question for Carrie. And I brought this up in our breakout session. I was extremely disappointed and disheartened that I didn't see elected officials in our community at this meeting. And my question to you is, how do we go about getting better buy-in by elected officials in Rockport? Because I know I'm not the only one who is frustrated by the apparent lack of interest on the part of many of our elected officials on these subjects.
That was for me, Jerry, did you say?
Yes, that
Yeah.
was for you.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I do not know your community and I don't know your officials. So please allow me to just speak in some generalities here.
That's fine.
All communities in Boston that I have worked, in Massachusetts that I've worked with, smaller communities, the elected and unelected officials tend to be very, very overwhelmed. They have so many things that they are doing and the demands on them are very, very high. So I just want to start by giving some empathy and grace to the people who are in these positions, because they have a lot of people coming to them with a lot of demands. And I don't know how everyone decides where to put their attention. So I do want to say that first. But the second thing I would say is that if this is important to a set of people, that the way to bring your elected officials along with you is to first try to coalesce yourselves around some specific ideas, right? And to go to them with not just complaints and like, why are you not listening? But we have some specific ideas. We have some specific hopes and intentions. We have some real questions that we want answered. We've even identified some resources like the MVP program, for example, right? And so I would say that I would treat those relationships with your elected officials as partnerships as much as possible, where you're saying, I am happy to do my part as a member of this community, but I expect you to do your part as a representative of this community. And I'll help, but I want to see some buy-in. So the first question I usually ask elected officials is, what do you need in order for this to be at the top of your priority list versus somewhere in the middle or at the bottom? And if you don't know how they would answer that question, then just go ask them, right? Go ask them, what would they need in order for this to be at the top of their priority list? Is it more people asking for it? Is it greater cost? Is it higher risk? Like what is it that would bump this to the top of the things that they have to care about? Because they have too many things to care about to for you not to know what is driving their priorities. Is that helpful, Jerry?
Oh, very, very, very helpful. And I totally agree with you. There's so many things on their plate. What our task is to put this issue to be number one on their plate.
So,
We have a question from Kay Berger.
hi, I just wanted to clarify, there is an MVVP application being prepared as we speak through the conservation agent's office. And that's John Lopez. And I think that thing is ready to go any moment now, if it hasn't already gone. It's for $250,000.
Great, thanks, Kay. We have a question from Maureen Barillo. I'm sorry.
Barilaro, that's okay.
Maureen, I'm sorry I just butchered your last name. Do
right.
you just want to ask your question?
Oh, so just, I mean, based on what Carrie was just saying and Jerry's question, so it sounds like forming some kind of a group would be a great way to get this started. So I'm wondering, is there already a group? And if there is, how to kind of be a part of that, or if there isn't, based on the interest of the people here right now, is there a group that can be formed to kind of start to follow Carrie's suggestions?
Well, Town Green could potentially help to facilitate a group. The Cape Ann Climate Coalition also has, I think Rockport Climate Action Group in Rockport is a group that is addressing some of these things as a climate action group that I think is also part of the Cape Ann Climate Coalition. So that's one place to start, is the Rockport Climate Action Group. Eric, do you know how to get in touch with them? Maureen, you can just send me an email and I can put you in touch with folks too.
Okay.
Eric, do you have another comment? Eric Hutchins, your hand is up.
Okay, I'm aware of an MVP proposal being put together for Rockport by the conservation agent. But while I have a lot of Rockporters here, or maybe yourself, Does anybody know if anybody from Rockport is involved with that application? Are any residents actively involved? Does anybody know?
Only what Rich Vieira said when you explained that many people have been trying to get input and have been turned away. And Mitch basically said, it's not time for any community input at this time.
I'd like to, could I ask a question to the professionals here from Harvard and the facilitator? From your experience in other municipalities, would it be valuable to have interested citizens in the topic who engaged in a grant application at the time it is actually going in? Or do you hire a consultant and then draw your public in later?
Carrie, what's your advice?
I guess two pieces of advice on this. The first is I'm not sure what the conservation agent is applying for, right? Whatever the specific project is, it would be important to understand that first. And if there is already an engaged group of people who would be affected in some specific way by the specific project that the conservation agent is applying for, then it would strengthen the proposal a great deal to have a letter of support from that organized group. So for example, I'm sorry, Maureen, I didn't catch the name of the group that you said a moment ago, but let me just use Town Green as the example. If the thing that the conservation agent is applying for, whatever the specific project is, if there is some sort of impact or outcome from that project that Town Green has an interest in, then Town Green could submit a letter of support. And that does actually have quite a lot of bearing on the people who are reviewing the applications. They like to see that members of the community are aware of this project and support it. So the first answer is for sure, yes, Eric, definitely. What is not helpful is to try to crowdsource the development of the proposal. Like these are on a tight time frame. They have to be written in pretty, like it's a structure, right? It's a very specific structure. You kind of want a consultant to write it who has done this before and won them because they know how to write it so that the reviewers like it. So you don't want to crowdsource the proposal, but you do want the impact and the outcomes to be something that people in the community really care about. And if you can get an engaged group of people in the community or several engaged people in the community to write those letters of support, that's very powerful.
So,
Thanks, Carrie, for that.
I was asked to write a letter of support for this, and through the town conservation agent was looking for individuals that would be impacted by climate change, including artists that were on Bearskin Neck. He approached a number of agencies, and I had suggested he get in touch with Tom Mickes's group as well too. So I think any of those letters of support from nonprofits are largely the voices that are being incorporated, and those nonprofits represent a great number of people, perhaps even here tonight. So if you're so inclined, you could probably contact him if you have a group that is impacted by this. And it's a study. It's to do much of what you're talking about right here today, as far as I understand.
Thanks, Kay. Sam, do you have a question, comment?
Yeah, just concur with what Carrie's saying. I've written a few MVP applications, and it does have to come from the community or a group of communities that then goes out for community support. That support can be inculcated early in it if you've got it, or you can do it the other way around. But the application, for obvious reasons, has to come from the community because that's who the money goes out to. And it's pretty tough to crowdsource those. The other thing, I just wanted to comment on Jerry's comment in terms of getting political traction on this. In my opinion, in working with select boards or all these communities for many years, it's a problem that's way too big to bring to them. This really belongs in Senator Tyer's lap and our local elected reps and Congressman Moulton in terms of looking at the creation of a Cape Ann climate district to really bring this up another couple of levels. The comment that these people are already, who are all volunteers to begin with and don't have the expertise to deal with, is dead on. And there is little or no planning capacity in back of these people to advise them to begin with. So it really has to go to a state level and really have, I think, more of a conversation there. And obviously it wouldn't just be Cape Ann, but this is state legislation that really needs to be talked about.
Thanks, Sam. Valerie?
So I would just like to follow up on Eric Hutchins' comment. I think there's a similar serious problem in Gloucester as well, and more widespread. There's a big chasm between the experts, the consultants, even the municipal staff who learn quite a bit over time, the regional agencies. They are very knowledgeable about what they do and have to fill out these applications with great care. The general public is at a great disadvantage in dialogue with them because they're so unfamiliar with this technical expertise, and they think about things in different ways, which is not to say that they don't have a great deal of inherent wisdom behind their own experiences and perspectives. And so one of the most difficult challenges, I think, for all of us is that how to build communication between the public and how they understand and think about things, and these experts who've had several decades of working day after day after day in very complex planning and regulation and policy and funding and science and all of this. Again, I will say, I don't believe that the stakeholder meetings are meeting the challenge either, because they get a narrow group of the population coming to those meetings and they don't represent the entire community. So Gloucester has a very similar problem. How and where you bring in public input and how that input interacts with very sophisticated expertise. That's one of the most central challenges I think we have in society as a whole. And we just have to try to keep getting better and better and better at it in terms of how to communicate with each other across those two cultures and areas of expertise versus the general public. If
Thanks,
that's
Bill.
not achieved, progress really can't be made in the end.
Well, I know that Town Green is committed to furthering community engagement and getting citizens together to discuss these issues. We must have the conversations, and our webinar series in Rockport has really shown that people are interested. We were so pleased to have such an amazing group of folks, and also our esteemed panel with Charles, Kira, and Carrie helping us think through these topics of adaptation, the options and the solutions more deeply, and also this discussion that has followed. I'm going to wrap up our webinar now with just some notes and thanks again to our presenters and to all of you who joined us. We will have this recording, this Zoom recording, put up on the website. I'm going to pause here because Carol has a question, and I'd like to be able to hear from Carol before we close with some upcoming events. Carol? Carol, you're muted.
Oh, I was just going to suggest the Town Green try to get our officials, the selectmen and the town administrator and residents, all these people who are here today and people from Gloucester, try to get us all in a brainstorming session And if you have to go to the upper level, what somebody suggested, Representative Moulton, or maybe you should go to them, I mean, as Town Green, and explain to them that we need a community discussion, and could they help bring in the selectmen? I was really disappointed today. There wasn't one selectman who showed up for this meeting, because I know you've sent them announcements, and I have sent them announcements, about meetings. So Town Green could figure out a way to get, we need our town officials and we need more community people. And I think you're doing a great job, and you've gotten a lot of us here, and that's great. But for the next level, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that comment, Carol. Town Green will try its best, as we always do. And just some notes about upcoming events for Town Green. We will have our last webinar in the Good Harbor Beach series, and we'll be looking at adaptation solutions and options for Good Harbor Beach. That's going to be on May 24th. It's a Wednesday night. The registration link will be out soon. So join us for that, for another kind of a conversation about adaptation. And also we have 2 climate conversations coming up through the Harvard Graduate School of Design Office for Urbanization on April 5th from 12 to 1 p.m. with Kerry Emanuel on modeling hurricane impacts. He's the MIT hurricane expert, and he'll be speaking to our community. And on May 10th from 12 to 1 p.m., we'll hear from Jesse Keenan on financing climate adaptation. If you're wondering about how things are paid for with all this adaptation going on, sign up to see Jesse Keenan. If you want more information about those 2 programs, feel free to email me at maureen@towngreen2025.org. And more information will also be on our website. Thank you to everyone for being with us tonight. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you, Maureen.
Sure.